Admit. Admit. We got people. Excellent.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good middle of the day, depending on where you are. I'm Ben.
And I'm Benjamin, but you could have gathered that part because I think you all probably know me, or hopefully you all know me. And welcome. We're going to wait for a few more people and see if we've got like one or two more people because we're currently at about half the class that was targeted, but we expect that some people will do this via recording or come in after the first class or whatever. That's the joy of these sorts of things.
Yep, so we'll give it a minute or two and watch my camera.
Yes. Well, Ben Murphy got a new camera, which he promised was going to work, and it worked brilliantly for all the trials, and then it started to fail, which is clearly a sign that Microsoft, or whoever he bought the camera from, loves them.
Yeah, it's very ironic.
It's technology. It fails on the best of times.
Yeah. Murphy's Law, and my last name is Murphy, so I'm sort of stuck with that. Okay, I think we get started, Benjamin. So welcome to everybody. And first thing I'd like to do, this is the first class of the micro certificate, and this is the first time we've ever run it. So thank you for being part of our first cohort. And we'd also like to give a big thank you to the Bradshaw Research Initiative for Minerals and Mining, which is in large part responsible for us being here today.
Yes, with the joys of people like Peter Bradshaw who can write checks, because the reality is programs like this that are actually reasonably well funded in periods like this do not happen without actually someone behind them. And that is the wonderful thing about Bradshaw, is that he actually has put his money where his mouth is, and he's trying to change the industry. And me and Ben somehow fell into his good graces.
Which is great.
Yes.
Today, what we're going to do, we want this to be a very interactive class, and not just today, in every session of this program. So we really crave feedback from you guys. So I suppose if there's a question as we're going, or we say something you like or you dislike, please just type in the chat or throw your hand up. I think there is still a hand raising function on Zoom. And let's discuss it, because we believe that having a class full of professionals from the mining industry and fostering discussion, whether people agree with us or not, we love different viewpoints. We believe that through this discussion, everyone learns better and gets a better understanding of the topics we're going through. So by all means, this isn't your traditional university lecture where you have to sit silently. We want interaction, we want discussion, we want engagement, and we're quite happy about disagreement.
And if you want to turn on your camera, feel free. If you want to be camera off, we're also okay with that. One of the things I've learned from dealing with public school is that people are very anxious about their Zoom background. So we respect both interpretations of that. Shall we move on?
Yeah.
Let us move on. 1 second, and we're going to get good at this stuff. Last time we did this, we actually had a professional with us who knew what they were doing, and we unfortunately are not nearly the Zoom experts of the UBC traditional faculty. Ben, do you want to lead off the safety share?
Yeah, thanks, Benjamin. So as with everything else in our mining life, safety is very important, and we want to put it front and center. So every class we have will start with a safety share. Today's theme, quite simple: think then act. I find from my experience on mine sites and in the industry in general, that accidents happen when people aren't thinking and they're not focusing, or they're distracted by something. So whenever you go to do a task, and this applies equally to the mine site as it would in a home scenario or an office scenario, if it's a new task, always take a couple of minutes or even just 1 minute and do a quick step back from it and do a quick risk assessment in your head. I'm not saying you need to fill out a piece of paper or check some tick boxes, but just think about what you're going to be doing and if there are potential risks around it and things that could harm your safety. Complacency kills. So don't just leave something, question it, think about it in terms of the risk, and make sure you're safe.
Now, Ben has an excellent story about him doing home wiring and electrocuting himself, or almost electrocuting himself, but we're going to avoid that one because it shows that he should not be doing wiring, which is a whole side issue with regards to Ben's lifestyle. I've got a 19-year-old son who's just finished a high school degree in wiring, so he does my wiring around the house, so he's the one who gets shocked, as opposed to myself. I limit myself to plumbing these days. So let's talk a bit about who we are. Now, this is going to be unique in that we're teaching executive education from a hands-on perspective. Our goal is to teach rather than from an academic perspective of we're professors and we're going to teach you how the real world doesn't work. We're going to focus on from an actual applied perspective, how do you apply things? Now, I am unique in that I've worked at a hedge fund. At one point, I was the largest shareholder of Vale and Freeport at the same time on my book. I've run an exploration company and done a deal with BHP. I've been an academic, or I am an academic now. I'm writing a PhD in mineral economics, and I've worked for equipment vendors, both FLS and Autotech. So I've got a good range of how the industry works. I've worked for everyone except a mining company in the space. And from that, I've developed a lot of perspectives. Now, the most important one is I started off as a medieval historian. My very first undergraduate degree is medieval history, and my professor made me to promise never to get a PhD, and he let me finish the course. So that can tell you what an excellent historian I was. Ben?
Yeah, and I can't match those unique skills for what we're doing. My background's a bit more mundane. I've got an engineering degree in mineral processing from my home country of Australia. And after that, I set off working my way around the world, and I worked in mineral processing plants as a metallurgist and later as a manager in a number of different countries. I really loved the work, but after I met my wife, I thought I'd better settle down and have a bit more city-centric lifestyle. So I turned to the dark side and started working for some OEMs. Through this experience, both working hands-on on site as a mineral producer and as an OEM, I've seen the industry from a number of different perspectives. And one of the things, when I started working with Benjamin, we were really looking at equipment and how fixing up equipment and the value in fixing up equipment and spending that money, making that investment, could actually improve an operation's profitability. And that started me down the whole path of questioning the value, the way we did certain things, and really trying to focus in on understanding the value of the different parts of the industry and how it all goes together, and try to maximize where we're missing out at the moment. And typically, oh, sorry, Benjamin.
No.
Typically, we will have a guest panelist for all other lecturers. But today, as it's the very first lecture in the whole program, we thought we'd do it just with Benjamin and I. Yeah.
And this came together because Ben called me up in March and asked me, how do we teach value? Because we were getting really frustrated with trying to explain things. And one of the things we learned was that we could actually teach it. So we ran a trial program in the spring where we did a very high level, very fast program. And one of the things we learned was we could teach value, but we could not teach value quickly. So we then broke the course down, and that's what this is. This is going to be an entire program, not a quick, you're going to learn everything in 90 minutes and you are done. So OEM. An OEM is an original equipment manufacturer. They're the people who make the stuff that sits inside of mines that makes things cool. So you get orange and you get red and you get blue and you get pink. So Komatsu would be an OEM, Caterpillar's an OEM, FLS is an OEM, Autotech's an OEM. They're the people who make the equipment. And everyone thinks they get rich. The reality is being an OEM is probably the least profitable part of the entire business. Which is quite a fascinating thing considering how important their designs are and how much risk they take versus reward. So that's where that is. What we'd like now is we'd like everyone in the chat while we go on to actually give a quick 3-point on the similar line explanation of who you are. This is going to change, and we're going to every week do this because we expect that some people will be here. We have about 70% of the group. This is going to be a relatively small class to start off with, but we want people to actually introduce each other, and our goal is to build social connections here. One of the big things we're realizing is a lot of people don't actually go across streams. And in the spring, we learned that the social connection was almost as valuable as the content. So this is going to be the goal, is to build connection, i.e. why we're cool with cameras and stuff.
Yeah, so if in the chat you could just put down, your name's already shown, which is kind of handy, but if you just put down your background, so if you're a geologist, a plant operator, a metallurgist, heaven forbid a finance person, and perhaps where you are. I already see some people there putting things down. We have Judy from Colorado, Golden. I'm in Parker, Judy, so I'm at the opposite corner of the Denver Metro to you. Janice from Vancouver. We've got Lima, Peru, Southern Brazil, Toronto, France. That's fantastic. And thanks, Judy. She's already jumped on that, and she's a mining engineer background and consulting with some other interesting bits and pieces as well. Great.
Okay, so while people are doing that, we're going to talk about why we're doing what we're doing. Our goal is to teach people an additional leg to their stool. We're not going to teach you engineering. We're not going to teach you environmental management. We're not going to teach you what you already know. We're going to teach you how to take what you know and make an economic argument out of it. Okay, now that is a very different thing than teaching any of these subjects. So if you're coming in with a finance perspective, we're going to teach you how to make an economic argument out of finance. If you're coming in with a mineral processing perspective, we're going to teach you how to make an economic argument out of mineral processing. And if you're coming in with a geology perspective, we're going to teach you how to make an economic argument out of exploration. And for some people, that's a very uncomfortable thing. If you believe that the science is all you're here for, this course is going to drive you very crazy, because we're less focused about the science and we're more focused about how to turn your belief into action. And that's going to be a very different perspective. Does that make sense to people? And you can up click or down click or whatever as we move along.
But by that same token, we don't want to exclude anyone. So if you're a geologist and we're talking about flotation and bubbles and you're not sure because it sounds a bit insane, please stop us, ask a question. Great. If we can't answer, Benjamin or I, I'm sure there's someone else in the audience who can. We want to break down these silos. We do want, as a goal from this program, everyone to get a little bit of an understanding of what other disciplines and other groups of people are going through and doing. Cool, we've got a few students in the audience, that's great. Number of mining engineers, that's exciting. Okay, so we've got a bit of a mix. I haven't seen a metallurgist yet today.
Nope, I don't believe we have metallurgists in the class, Ben, which is quite fascinating. Yeah, I know, you had a couple.
They might gang up on me.
They would gang up on you. Now you can give complete and absolute BS and people will never call you on it. Okay, so let's talk about what's going to be in this course, in this first class. And we're going to be relatively simple. We're going to start off about why economics. Then we're going to talk about what we can't control. I hate to say it, but the biggest mistake that people make around economics is they assume that every variable is a variable. And the reality is most variables in life are constants. Most variables in life that you think you get to change, you don't get to change. And you have to accept what you can't change or else you go crazy. We're going to talk about the course as a general from a class perspective, how the class is going to work out and how the class is going to be split perspective. And then we're going to talk about perspective taking. Now, one of the most interesting things I have learned is how differently everyone in the world sees perspective. Okay, everyone has a very different perspective. And we're going to talk about how to take the 3 core perspectives of decision making. Then we're going to talk about how you make a decision, how you frame a decision, and then we're going to talk about the goal of this program from an output perspective. So that's what we're going to get through today. Today is the first class of a 5-class course, which is going to be speed dating on our program. By the end of these 5 days, you're either going to love us or you're going to hate us, and we're okay with either outcome. We're not going to necessarily give everyone go on to the rest of the program, but the goal is that you come out of this with a very core understanding of how to do very high level stuff very quickly. But understand that this BRIMM 101 is call it a 60,000 foot exercise at 9,000 miles an hour going over topics. And you're going to feel lost a bit because it's not, a lot of the stuff isn't obvious. We've pre-gamed with some of the speakers for later on, and some people get angry because we're approaching things from a slightly different perspective. So this is all going to be, economics is not something that people necessarily like. And that is a very core, that's a very core issue. Ben, anything to add?
Yeah, I think, no, I think that sums it up pretty well.
Excellent. So let's start with what, let's talk about why money economics. So here's the thing. Everyone I know loves their discipline. Okay, I've yet to meet a metallurgist that doesn't love bubbles. I've yet to meet a geologist that doesn't dream of going out into the field and looking at rocks. I haven't yet met anyone who doesn't like explosives. Like everyone apparently loves blasting. Blasting is like universally loved. It's like if you don't love blasting, you're not in destroying rocks. It seems to be universally loved. And fundamentally, everyone seems to think they like sustainability, but no one actually understands what that means. So we have a very interesting industry where we have a whole bunch of things that people do, and we don't know how it ties together. Now, the one thing I want to say is we are incredibly bad at making economic decisions in our industry. There was an incredibly good study about the gold industry, where a hedge fund in New York showed that the total return on invested capital from the gold industry over a 10 or 20-year period was 1%. So that means all investment decisions made over 10 to 20 years into gold mining delivered a 1% return on equity, okay? Or investment, depending on how you look at it. We can debate that terminology. That is not particularly intelligent. When I ran Orin Inc., which was a company that collected data on the exploration space, I determined that roughly 95 to 97% of all exploration dollars were evaporated, disappeared. Nothing was generated from them. Most of the mining people I know are into moving rocks. They're into moving lots of rocks, but they're not into moving economic rocks. The amount of times that me and Ben have been on a mine site and had to have a discussion about, well, why are you moving that? Like, that should not be near the mill. Is that really ore? Is that not ore? People don't have a concept around that concept. And finally, most of the mineral processing decisions we've seen around equipment selection and design have been about how to reduce the capital cost, and almost nothing's about how to make optimized recovery or operating costs. So all the way around, we have an industry that is remarkably bad at making economic decisions. And from our perspective, that leads to the biggest crime of all, which is sustainability. Now, I'll give you some random data because it's easy to give. Replacing one slurry pump or optimizing one slurry discharge pump on a mill is the equivalent of removing somewhere between 10 and 100 Americans from the planet from an environmental footprint perspective. Okay, if you want to talk about an industry that can make sustainable differences with economically driven decisions, we're it. We've got the lowest hanging fruit per individual involved in the industry of any industry in the world. And I'll stand by that and debate that against anyone who wants to debate me. We have very few people who make very large decisions about very few things, and they don't even think about them. And that's what we want to change. That's why we're building this program. Our goal is to change how we do things, both from an economic perspective and from a sustainability perspective. Now, I am writing a PhD in environmental economics around decision-making in mining. So if anyone is investing their life into figuring this stuff out, I win. Okay, I gave up a very relatively lucrative career to focus on this because I believe it's just that important. Ben still works for industry, so Ben is more rational than me. His wife would never let him go quite off the deep end quite as quickly as I have. But my wife likes me. So let's start with something that's very important. There's things you cannot control.
And this slide illustrates what we're not going to tell you we're going to do wonderful things with. We'll start with the first one, commodity prices. As an industry, we are price takers. We don't set them, we take what the market gives us. So that's the first thing we don't control.
Now, we can talk about the next two things, or the next three things. The next three things are location specific. Every mine has a grade. okay? And there's nothing you're going to do that's going to change the fundamental ore in the ground. You might mine it differently, you might change the speed, you might change a whole bunch of things around it, but you have a fundamental set of real options around grade. On metallurgy, you have metallurgy. If you got clay, you got clay. You're not going to will it away, you're not going to change it, you're going to have to deal with it. So both grade and metallurgy are things that you are a taker of. Now, you can work better at optimizing on how to deal with them, but you have to accept that sometimes metallurgy is not your friend, that sometimes shifting recovery is just not an option. And finally, we're going to make a very strong statement here. Economics, or what we're proposing, is not going to be a magic bullet that's going to make everything a first quartile, tier 1 glorious operation. Our goal is to help people look, if you followed all of our advice, my theory is any mine can shift a quartile. Any fourth quartile mine can go to a third quartile mine. Any tier 2 exploration project optimized can become a tier 1 exploration project optimized. But we're never going to turn a 0.27 copper porphyry into Escondida. There's nothing you're going to do that's going to make that jump three or four quartiles. But having said that, you can make a lot of money if you just get a little bit better, because we're in an industry where everyone is relatively disorganized. Equipment is ancient. People make decisions very emotionally, and there's a lot of room for change.
And another on top of that, Benjamin, decisions are made. Quite often they're decisions made at the start of a project, and then 10, 20, 30 years even on, people are still holding on to those same decisions rather than stepping back, questioning the status quo and saying, hey, maybe we could do this better now.
I think more important than holding on to them, they're emotionally holding on to them.
Yeah, and we'll get to that a little later in today's class. But you think about it. You think about technology. You think about how many of us, we all have mobile phones. Most of them are smartphones. 20 years ago, how many of us had mobile phones? 30 years ago, how many of us had iPads? Technology has come a long way. And do we always use the latest and greatest in our industry? Or are we still holding on sometimes to sacred cows that may be better going to the slaughter?
Okay. Now, keep in mind, just because you can't not control the uncontrollable does not mean you don't want to talk about it. So just because you can't control something doesn't mean you don't want to put it on a list. Doesn't mean you don't want to put it as a variable. So you're going to see in a lot of my models and a lot of the stuff we're going to show you gray boxes or things that are inputs. It doesn't mean you can take them out of the picture, but you have to accept them as a constant. And that's a very core difference. And accepting what you can't change, I think, is the key. Shall we move on, Ben?
Yeah, just one more point on that, and being price takers and accepting it. I remember when I was back in operations, we'd constantly monitor the metal price. And my background's majority lead and zinc, so we're always looking at whichever commodity was more sexy at the time. And we were fixated on it, though once again, we were takers. We couldn't do much to deal with that. What I do find now, talking to a number of miners, a number of large miners, is they've become a lot more accepting of this. Even in the conversation I had a few weeks ago, I was told straight out, yeah, we cannot control the price, so we're actually deciding to just ignore it and focus on reducing our costs, improving our efficiency, and focusing on all the things we can change, which I thought was a nice, refreshing way of coming at it. So the industry is changing, perhaps just not as quickly as we'd all like.
Excellent. And sorry, I'm bad with. Okay, so let's talk about tracks. Let's talk about the anchoring. Our goal is to anchor people within this program. And our goal is to give people the ability to find comfort and base themselves off of where they want to be. There's one track, which is sustainability, and our belief is that everything should be anchored with sustainability. And we're only going to have one elective in sustainability. We're not necessarily intelligent enough to have 3 or 4 of them, because I don't think that there is that much content from our perspective. It's relatively tied into everything. And then we've got the 3 other tracks. We've got mineral processing, which is all about how you set and optimize a mill, and a mill being everything from post-mine into operations. We've got exploration, which is all about how you explore and build for a mine, which is a very different skill set. And then we've got finance. Now, here's the funny thing about finance economics. Just because you can do an IRR and NPV does not mean you actually know how to use the IRR and NPV. Economics is all about tying tools to an economic decision. So I have met so many quants or people who live in the numbers world, which we're going to get to, who can do the most amazing things with math. But if you actually ask them what it means, they're really not quite sure. And we're going to teach corporate finance. By the end of this, you'll be able to do an IRR and an NPV and a real option and a this and a that and a whole bunch of other tools. We're going to teach all that stuff, but we're not going to teach it in a vacuum. We're going to teach you how to do it from an applied perspective.
Very applied, yeah. And that's one of the things we've seen isn't always commonly taught. We have these programs and there's lots of talk about these things and examples of them. But when you actually try to apply them to a real world practical problem, like upgrading a flotation cell in a plant or adding some new capacity to your mining fleet, they're actually applied quite differently to sometimes in the textbooks. And what we've also found, it's not always one tool fits all. There's a multitude of tools out there and each of them probably has their place. But understanding which one to use and when, and how to sell the case. So you get your new piece of equipment, your plant improvement, your money to go and poke some more holes in a certain spot is so critical to the successful venture.
And as being a finance person, I'll tell you one of the most amazing things about finance people. Most of us will not admit what we don't know. Most of us will sit in a room, look really good in our suit, nod our head, and be completely lost and not admit it. The number of times I've been on a mine site and had to point out what the thickener was to the finance person who just paid for it. And by the way, if you lose a thickener, it's kind of hard because that's like 30 meters across. These are not a small part of the mineral processing plant. They're the big tanks where the waste goes. The fact that they don't know what a thickener is, yet they just paid $100 million to install one, is an interesting problem. And that's happened numerous times to me while looking at these things. So our goal is to bring everyone across the line, and it's not necessarily going to be an equal line.
And that's just adding to that. One of the things we've seen, as we've gone out and we've worked through cases with people in plants and then gone to head office and tried to explain that case to them, there is a disconnect. And the disconnect's on a lot of levels. There's definitely a trust disconnect, but it probably comes more from communication, lack of a common language. And that's one of the things we're setting out to bridge in this course. We do have these different tracks, but there is a lot of overlap. And you'll hear us say it repeatedly. We want to break these silos. We want the metallurgist to be able to speak to the head office finance person in a language they understand. And vice versa. We want the head office finance person to be able to bring the business case back that the metallurgist submitted and say, hey, I kind of get this, but can you express it slightly differently? And that's one of the core goals of this program. Before we move on, just another point, the sustainability track, I think it's just becoming, sustainability is part of our business. And I know Benjamin and I firmly believe that. And I think every day in the news, last month, November, you saw Newmont, the world's biggest gold miner, come out with some incredible sustainability targets, really trying to lead the way in that area. I think it was a 30% reduction in their GHG emissions by 2030 and a net zero carbon emission goal by 2050. You know, people are taking this stuff seriously because they're realizing it's not just some pretty greenwashing. It's something that's seriously needed. And by actually getting into these changes and looking at them, and Benjamin and I have definitely had this experience in a lot of cases we've looked at, the sustainable way is the more profitable way in the longer term.
Even in the shorter term. I mean, let's be really blunt. I mean, there's so many low-hanging. The first 30% of environmental savings in the mining business delivers on average a 20 or 30 or 40% IRR. There's a hugely profitable bunch of sustainable decisions. If you want to get to 100% zero emissions, then yeah, your cost curve is gonna shift massively. But we have an industry that is has remarkable amount of fat to be reduced. And a lot of that has to do with time. Mines are built over 25 years. Mines operate for 50 years. How many of you guys own a car that was built before 1995? How many of you, okay, one, brilliant. How many of you have worked at a mine that was built before 1995? See my point? Exactly. The mines last far longer than the cars with far fewer upgrades. Should we move on, Ben?
Yep, absolutely. Oh, Judy, that's very impressive.
Ooh, nice. But a 64 would have been better.
now, Nicholas.
And Nicholas, it doesn't mean you can't buy a 1995 car. That if you're a college student at University of Toronto, that's what you should be driving. Because after all, it's economic.
But probably not that Mustang.
There was actually a great story in Toronto. Ben, did you see that one? There was a guy who was driving around in tags that expired in 1989 in Toronto. They had successfully driven the car for something like, I'm going to say 31 years without replacing the tags. And the total fine was $120.
Really?
Yeah.
That's almost a case study on risk management in itself. And he did very well.
Yeah, and the 325i is that's a brilliant car, especially if you slammed it. But we're going to assume that you haven't slammed it. Actually, you're a mining person. You've slammed it. That engine is not going to be stock. Something tells me there'll be something slightly different to it. But we're going to stay away from that one. Okay, let's get back away from cars or having fun. Let's talk about time.
Talk about the class a bit. A few more details.
So, busyness. Our goal is to make this an expandable program. 90 minutes a week for class, twice a week. So while we're doing a class, you'll be doing about 3 hours a week of class time. There'll be an hour to 2 hours of homework that you really should do, meaning we're going to expect that that's the quickest you can get through it. And you can spend an infinite amount of time on the homework most weeks. So the homework is designed to be expandable. We've got checklists that you could do 2 or 3 companies on and really learn some skills from. Our exploration company checklist, every investor in the world should be using that on every investment they look at. And it's just absolutely really cool tools. And we'll teach you how to use it. And we'll ask you to do one company. We're not going to ask you to do every company in the world. You might not have interest in it. So there'll be an hour, 2 hours of homework. Now, the program itself, we're going to require 30 class sessions over 7 courses to get the micro certificate. And our goal is that people get that done in about 18 months, which means you're in class once a quarter, twice a quarter. We're not trying to make this a full-time, this is your life. Our goal is to make this something you can do while you're going along. As you go along, every course will have its own micro badge that will show up on LinkedIn that you'll be able to show off, that you'll be able to talk about. So it's not like you're going to wait till the end to say, oh, I got this shiny new degree. This is going to be an active, dynamic program. Now, some tracks are going to be take longer. Some tracks will take the full 18 months because we won't offer them as frequently. Some of the courses we expect that we're going to have 6 people in the world that want them. And which our goal is still to figure out how to try to offer those. And some we're going to fill up as we grow. And that is very much going to be track by track dependent. And we're figuring that out right now. So with due respect, this is all going to be a bit of a learning curve.
Yep. Okay. Keep going, Benjamin. Next slide, please.
I will. Grading. I love this. Now, we are adults. Everyone in this program is an adult, and everyone in this program is trying to learn for themselves. So everything's pass-fail. I know that sounds crazy, but it's impossible to grade on a curve or give an ABC with the range of skills here. People are going to come in with very different skills. We will read things. If you want comments, flag them. We'll gladly discuss your homework. I have trying to build up skills in the industry, and our goal is to get involvement. But you have to do it. In an optimal world, you turn in 4 out of 5 assignments, which means in this first class it's 4 out of 5, and we'll work out on how that works. And you have to, at the end, you will be certifying that you've done the homework and you've done the attendance to get the certificate, the badge for individual courses. We are going to look over your shoulder a bit, and if you blatantly lie, we will go back and ask you to finish the homework. We'll still let you graduate. We're just going to go back and ask. We are going to be under the UBC Senate in how we're doing things, so we do have to actually deliver an educational product. The problem with UBC is this is not being done by Ben and Ben's fly-by-night executive education program. We're under the mining school of UBC, so we sort of actually have to do this right. And we're being supervised by them. So they've even given us an educational consultant who sits and tells us whether our curriculum passes muster. So it's quite an interesting bridge, because most of the time people like us tend to do this on the slide. At the end, you will get a micro certificate from UBC Bradshaw School of Mining. And we think that's going to be a valuable piece of paper in the long run. In the short term, we've got no clue how much that is. But considering that it's $6,000 versus a minimum of $150,000 for our competing products, and we'd argue we have the same amount of content, I think we're going to deliver a really nice return on investment. I mean, our goal is to deliver well over 100% ROI on investment for our program. And I think we'll easily be able to do that.
Yep. Just one extra point he skipped over there at the end. We will periodically recommend reading, and it's more, Benjamin and I actually both listen to management books and a lot of other books on audio. So we're big, we've both got that in common, which is kind of interesting. And I know when we find something good, we generally listen to it more than once, and we will recommend it. We're not going to be like a traditional course where you've got to read all this before you come to class. We will discuss things in class. We will take ideas from authors and others who we believe have had good ideas, or ideas at least worth sharing and ideas worth discussing. So we will throw out recommendations. Sometimes we'll give a reference, sometimes we won't. If you want one, please ask. But it's purely up to you. This is about flexibility. It's about your learning. And yeah.
And we're not, I've read all the academic papers. We're not going to be doing a lot of those. And I've looked at most of the online YouTube videos from people in the industry, and I very much disagree with them. So you're going to get our perspective. We're not going to give you a bunch of old white men who've had the same view since 1984 to regurgitate their position in the world. We're looking for diversity of views, and both of us come from a very different perspective. The first time me and Ben worked together, my wife, who's a lawyer, came into my office and said, "You guys are screaming at each other. Are we getting sued?" And I said, "No, we're just working out a problem." This is very much a difference of opinion. We're coming at this from two different perspectives, and a lot of our tools will come in from other perspectives. We're not saying you can only take from the mining business. The fact is, there's books like Loon Shot or Take the Risk from Ben Carson that are so much better than any book written about mining, that why would you not look at aerospace or look at heart surgery or look at something else? Why would you stick yourself to only making decisions within our space?
Yeah, absolutely. Just a question came up from Janice. We've mentioned hashtag BRIMM101. We will come back to that later at the end of the day. It's something different we're trying. Once again, with the same goals of promoting discussion, promoting diversity of thought, and getting everyone's ideas out there. But park that for now. We'll come back to it and cover that off at the end of today's session.
That's going to be the homework.
Yeah, it is. She's advanced. She's reading ahead.
Yes.
Cool. So Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4 p.m. This was the time we picked. It seemed to be a good time globally to access the most people possible, and still keep us sane. It's the end of a long working day for us, but we think it's still a good time. We still have energy, and that's what we're going to try to focus on, getting the classes done. Now, once again, we'd love you to come. We love you to interact, and we love to get your feedback. So that is our prime goal. If you can't make the class, and we've talked about people's busy schedules, and we appreciate that, there will be a recording of the previous day of the class that you missed, put on the learning management system within 24 hours. I think that's the goal we've got. So the recording of this lecture with exactly what we're saying will be there. So if you can't make the class, or you want to go back and review something we said, please do. It will be there. It will be available to you as a student.
One quick thing I want to say about recordings. So we will be cutting up recordings and sharing them publicly. We prefer that if you download this and send it to all your friends, we prefer you to do that. If you do that, we're not going to stop you. We're not going to be difficult about this, but we are at some point trying to make this economically viable. which will take some time. And we're luckily we have Bradshaw behind us, so we can take a bit of time to do that. The homework assignments, when we give a handout that's completely separate, that is designed to be shared. So the exploration handout, the mineral processing questionnaire, we'll have questionnaires, and those are fully shareable within the industry. So we will have content that's designed to travel and for you to take into your day job, and we'll have content that we prefer you didn't share. The videos we prefer you didn't share, but if you share one, there's nothing we can do about it. I mean, we're not going to be difficult on it. We're just not going to be particularly happy with you. If we shared one and we gave you a free class, then we're going to be might not give you another free class. Funny how that works.
Anyway, let's get going. First, yes. Is there any more questions on the program itself, or the class setup, housekeeping questions?
Excellent. And keep in mind, we're going to be doing a lot. Our goal is to get everyone up to I'm going to say almost an MBA level of knowledge. You should be able to have everything you get out of an MBA from this program if you're only doing mining. So we're not going to give you the breadth of a traditional MBA, but we're going to get you incredibly focused so that around the business of mining, you know as much as any MBA, or a lot more actually. We find that traditional MBAs in our business are terrifying because they come in with this incredibly broad concept of how they're going to reinvent something that is incredibly simple. There's nothing quite like seeing a value proposition from an engineer MBA that it's determined he needs to write 28 slides or 28 pages of calculations to justify a pump. Okay, because by the 7,000th line of code, he might have made a mistake. If you can't justify it in 50 lines or 30 lines or 100 lines, you probably can't justify it. So simplicity matters. Let's get going.
Cool.
And ask questions if you have them, by the way. We like questions. Okay, so let's talk about perspective taking. I know it's crazy to start off economics and finance with perspectives, but everything is driven by how people perceive things. And from my perspective, there are 3 fundamental perspectives that I use. And by the way, I'm slightly autistic, so a lot of this is not natural to me. I had to learn perspective taking because for me I didn't naturally automatically take someone else's perspective. There's 3 basic perspectives on every decision from my perspective. There's the quantifiable perspective. Now, you all know that guy who puts math behind every decision. He can tell you that the 1965 Ford Mustang 6-cylinder has this size engine and gets about 22 miles to the gallon and does 0 to 60 about 11.3 seconds. Actually, it's closer to 14, but we're not going to talk about how slow the 1965 Ford Mustang is. I might be that quantifiable person. We're not going to. No shame here or outing ourselves as someone who's quantifiably focused. Or the BMW 325i has a 4-cylinder engine in it from 1992. Yes, I would not be that person. Anyways, there's a quantifiable person who everything's math. Okay, we go to sleep with equations in our head and we wake them up with them, and we can refinance a mortgage in our head, and we grocery shop with the concept of how much we spend each month, and we're completely math driven. Rarely do we actually tie that to reality. Rarely do quantifiable people actually take the math and add another perspective to it. Qualifiable people are the middle. They write theses. They write an argument. They put words on it. They sort of think they're putting math behind it, but a lot of it's a story equation. There's a wonderful Gary Larson cartoon which said that hell was being forced to do story problems all day. Okay, if the train leaves from New York at this speed and here at this speed and then they collide somewhere, what happens? You know, that sort of stuff, which is sort of math, but sort of isn't math. The qualifiable person's trying to get in between the 2 sides. And sorry about the glare, we're going to get my lighting a little bit better on my glasses. The emotional perspective, now that's where it gets interesting. The emotional perspective is what everyone claims they're not in the mining business. No one's emotional. Yet, if you talk about certain types of equipment, well, that's the only type of float cell that works, or that's the only I will only use a yellow mining truck. How dare you sell me a non-yellow mining truck? I'm a yellow mining truck person. People in our industry have incredible visceral emotions about things that if you actually told them they're emotional about it, they might, they will not believe you, but they are emotional. And our industry is very much driven by emotional decision-making. The bulk of decisions in my mind that are made in our industry are not made for quantifiable or qualifiable reasons. There's very few groups, and I can name them. BHP, for example, is incredibly good at quantifiably making decisions to the point where they burn people out. Okay, they're MIT level of making quantifiable decisions. But most groups, especially in the gold mining business, are 100% emotional. And Ben Murphy's going to disagree with me on that, but we can have that conversation.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to disagree with you. But on top of this, I'm just reading some of the comments. Yeah, numbering of soil bags. Yeah, and yeah, absolutely.
I've had that fight. I've literally been in the field, and people get very upset that you don't put the year into the numbering.
Sorry, if someone's watching this on video, I'm reading the comments.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, coming back to it, you've got these three different perspectives. Does anyone have a comment on which one's the best for decision making? No comments?
I don't think there is a best.
Well, I'm
all three.
All three, absolutely, Janice.
Yeah.
We agree fully. Decisions aren't made in a vacuum. And this is an important reason to consider all these factors. No matter what decision you make, because you're not in a vacuum, you're usually working for a miner or working for a company, you've got to sell that decision. And I've found from experience, it's very important to cover off all three of these bases to make a successful sale of a decision or anything, whatever we're talking about selling. Because different people react differently to different parts, depending on their perspective and the way they like to see the world.
Excellent.
Yep.
So
excellent. Sebastian, great comment. His comment was, we need to take into account every perspective to make a rational decision.
We also
a really nice way of putting it.
Yeah, and we also need to sell to all three decision makers.
Yeah.
How many people have been quantifiable but had an emotional boss? And no matter how many times you come in and say, the answer is 5, the boss says, but it's yellow.
Yep.
No, it's the answer is, it's not a color, it's 5. It's yellow. You have to be able to sell the emotional decision, and that's not the easiest thing in the world to accomplish. And that's something that people just do very, very poorly. And I'm going to try something different from a lighting perspective, see if that reduces my glare. Slightly it does. Okay, so quantifiable. Now, the thing about quantifiable decisions in mining is they are all about ratios. Dollars per ton, percent recovery, cubic meters of water per ton of ore, time offline versus time online. Quantifiable is always about measuring something against something else. It's rarely a static number. Okay, now if you have a static number and it's a quantifiable decision, it's not a decision, it's a statement of fact. Okay, so the price of copper is $5,500. That's a statement of fact. It's not a, you need a ratio, and I think that's very important. That's very important to keep in mind. And if you have to keep in mind that the right ratio matters. So the net present cost of a new tailings dam is the wrong ratio for a tailings dam, because the reality is every tailings dam has a different size, a different life, a different timeline, a different cash flow, a different everything. The net present value per ton, or the net present cost per ton of every ton behind the dam, is a much more meaningful ratio. Or the annualized cost of the tailings dam is even a more meaningful ratio. So when you get quantifiable, not only do you have to come up with a number, but the number actually has to be something that's rational. And the thing about mining is most generic financial ratios are irrelevant. Okay, I can't believe I'm saying that, but traditional finance ratios for the most part are not relevant most of the time. So you're making up ratios a lot of the times because people have not thought about the ratio they need for a particular job. A lot of what I'm writing at UBC is new ratios around tailings management or around this or around that to come up with an economic ratio. Qualifiable. Yes, safety as well. Absolutely. Qualifiable. Can you put words to your thesis? Now, that sounds so easy, but it really is hard. Can you come up with a 30-word sentence about why it matters? And can you write a thesis that can travel without you? Now, it's one thing to have a thesis, but can you make the thesis so that when you walk away, the person you've told the thesis to can play telephone to his boss, his boss's boss's boss, and the thesis still makes sense. Okay, most of the upgrades, most of the exploration plans, most of the decisions, whether you drill 100,000 feet or 100,000 meters or this or that, rarely travel because the thesis did not travel well. So taking the time to write a good economic thesis is incredibly important. And finally, you have to acknowledge your emotional bias. Okay, the most interesting thing about privilege that I've learned this summer, and I've spent a lot of time, I live in Portland, Oregon. So by definition, if I have not learned about privilege, I'm going to be stoned because this is what Portland's been about all summer, is that I've learned that emotionally, everyone has an emotional bias. We all carry around emotional decisions, even if we think ourselves as the most quantifiable people in the world. Okay, we all try to understand how that works. And a lot of those emotional biases are incredibly self-serving. And that's not a bad thing. I am doing this upgrade to get myself a better job. I am doing this upgrade to show off my skills. I am doing this because I emotionally care about it. There's an emotional thesis and everything. And I'm not saying that you have to get rid of it. I'm saying you just have to acknowledge it. The thing about emotional theses is you have to acknowledge yours, and then you have to acknowledge everyone else's at the tables. So there's a wonderful poker saying, which is if you sit down at a table and you don't know who the mark is, you're the mark. If you're trying to sell an upgrade and you don't know everyone at the table's emotional theses and why they're there, you're never going to make it happen. If you're trying to sell an exploration project, you're never going to make it happen. You have to actually successfully pull that off or be incredibly stubborn. And this is the bit, yeah.
No, it was a point. It was a point made by, I think, Eric and Judy before. Knowing your audience, knowing their emotional proclivity, if you like. And I know when we were talking about this before the class, Benjamin, you mentioned the book Love Languages.
Yeah, 5 love languages.
Yeah, which is a book about, once again, not necessarily in the normal engineering context, but knowing what makes people tick, knowing what appeals to them, knowing how to make them feel loved. And that's essentially what the emotional sale is about.
Me and Ben Murphy are great work husbands because both of our love language is acts of service. So we actually work great together. I figure out which the best coffee shop is. I figure out where the best bottle shop is. He figures out what I need. We actually work incredibly well together. This is our 3rd company together.
Yeah.
That we worked at. We work incredibly well together.
Or we don't learn.
Yeah, I don't know. It could be that. It
Anyway.
could be that issue. But Ben Murphy's wife nicknamed us as being married. And a lot of that is because we share that. Thankfully, we don't share its physical touch because that would be incredibly uncomfortable. But let's not go there. Sorry. Let's move on. Sorry. I'm supposed to be good boy.
Okay. Goalpost versus the right number. I guess, hi, my name's Ben. I'm an engineer. I like having the right number, preferably to 4 decimal places. And it's got to be the right number. And if it takes me 3 months to get the right number, I will spend 3 months to get my right number to 4 decimal places, just so the number I put down is the right number.
Hi, I'm Benjamin, and I believe that I would rather have a shotgun. I'd rather get roughly right the first time, decide if I want to spend more time to get a bit more right, decide if I want to spend a bit more time to get even better right, and then after a month, I might have a number that's plus or minus 50%. Now, those are the 2 perspectives. It took me how many years, Ben, to get to the point where you would agree that my perspective was better?
Yeah, it took you a while, but it took me a lot of being an engineer and then a lot of seeing how other engineers, and our industry does have a lot of engineers, just seeing how they tick. And it was after Benjamin pointed out to me and we started doing a lot of financial modeling together, I was shocked with how I behaved previously. But it is how we're conditioned to get the right number. And there's good reasons for that. But when we're talking about financial modeling, when we're talking about doing evaluation of the economics on mine site, spending all that time right up front to get the perfect number is probably not time well spent. And that's been a hard lesson for me to learn. But it has been learned.
And odds are you're not going to ask for a question. And it sounds really horrible to say that, but if you're spending all of that time looking for the right number, odds are you don't know what the right number actually is. That's a really difficult word to say, but most people who spend that much time on the right number don't know their math. Okay, so much better to build goalposts. And the way we define goalposts is what's your best case, and we're going to teach this. What's your best case? What's your worst case? How do you manage the downside? How do you build it as a bet? How do you pretend that you're sitting at the poker table, that you're sitting in a situation where you can put your range of bets on the table? And by the way, if you're betting your job, we're cool with that. I've done that lots of times. Sometimes it hasn't worked. But be aware that you're betting your job. Be aware that you're making that decision, because most people who bet their jobs don't know that's what they're doing when they're doing it. And finally, you're going to fail. Okay, we're not going to teach you the magic bullet on how to make things better. We're going to teach you how to fail better, how to fail with less risk, how to make things work better because your risk is lower. And we're going to tell you how to cherry pick the good cases. Okay, there's a lot of really bad decisions in this business. There's a reason why there's a 1% return on investment in the gold industry on average. Okay, because people are looking for the exact right answer. And the reality is it makes sense to upgrade flotation equipment, but it rarely makes sense to uptake a crusher. It makes sense to explore for open pit porphyries of a certain size. But if your first 3 drill holes are below the average mine grade of existing current operating mines, odds are you will not be mining this ore body for 20 years. So maybe you should stop. Maybe you should say, hey, I found a porphyry and it'll be economic in 15 years. Let's put it on care and maintenance until we need this grade porphyry. Because there are a range, and once you know your range once you know how to calculate that around all these things, you can make decisions a lot quicker, and you can spend a lot less time wasting time. And that's something we find very important to teach.
Yeah, and especially to someone like myself with an engineering background. And since I sort of learnt my lesson from Benjamin, I've seen it so many times. And it's usually some of the best engineers, the most engineering engineers I've worked with, they're the worst offenders at this. And when we start looking at these things and decision-making, financial decision-making, I'll definitely encourage you. Start with your thesis, come up with a wild ass guess. I think I can say ass, but anyway, I just did. Put that guess in, test your thesis, test the model on that. Did that work? Okay, now it's time to spend a little more effort making that guess a little bit better, a little bit closer. Test it again. Does it work? Great, it works. Let's invest a bit more time making sure we know what the number is. The nice thing is it comes back to the whole agile mentality. If the numbers you start putting in just don't work and it shows that it's not going to be an economic proposition, you can throw it straight out and look for the next thesis. So it saves time and gets the answer sooner.
So I learned this in high school physics. I had a brilliant high school physics teacher. I was 17 at the time. And he said, before you start any calculation, you should know the units and the magnitude of your answer. So you should know that you're looking for, it's roughly 5 seconds for this rock to fall from the top of the building. It's roughly 5 minutes for this rock to fall from space. It's roughly this amount of time. You should have an order of magnitude in your mind. You should model it in your head before you put it on paper. And this is what I do. I create ranges of outcomes in my head around lots of things, and then I think about them. You know, I'm currently spending a bunch of time on water desalination versus solar energy in Chile, just because it interests me this week. I'm reading hundreds of papers on the subject because I'm that sort of crazy person. And I'm building an order of magnitude of how much impact can you do by changing certain variables. And then I'm looking at it and coming back and narrowing it and determining if I want to write an academic paper on the topic. But I'm first from the outside, and most people are just so focused on the answer is 3, the answer is 5. People fall in love with what they think the answer is, and they fall in love with the Excel spreadsheet. Like the number of people who've given me a fundamentally flawed Excel spreadsheet where they made a mistake in cell B23 that has destroyed cell D595. But they're in love with that D595 number because it took them 4 days to get there. But they didn't pre-think through every step of the way. That's the biggest flaw in all of economics. As Ben will tell you, and most people won't believe me, I do all my modeling in my head before I ever touch Excel. I will literally sit in a boardroom with 15 other executives. They'll tell me a problem. I'll model it on a whiteboard, tell them the answer, and then go back and give them the Excel spreadsheet the next day. And I run it in my head from an order of magnitude framework perspective, how I think it should be before I come up with an answer. And I've gotten really good at that. It used to be it took us 70 models, me and Ben back and forth, and now we usually version 7 or 8 actually works. And we're currently fighting about one for this class, which is great fun. It's nice to be fighting again about models.
It is.
Okay, so let's talk about goals. And I know this is really crazy, and this slide's going to take a lot of time. Okay, this is up to this point we've been broad and generic, and here we're going to talk about what is the goal of this program. And our goal of this program is not to fundamentally change everything. Our goal of this program is to maybe give the average person a 10% economic shift. You make 100 grand a year, into the program, make $110,000 a year. Wonderful. Okay, that doesn't sound like a lot, but if you only paid 6 grand for the program, you made 150% annualized ROI. Tell me the number of bonds you can buy with 150% annualized ROI. So little goals, little shifts deliver an incredibly oversized return on investment if the investment is small. Little shifts with a massive investment don't work these things through. So we are looking to teach people how to optimize versus how to be the perfect person. So currently mortgage rates are low. You can spend a month trying to pick the very best 5-year if you're in Canada or 30-year if you're in America fixed rate mortgage. Or you can very quickly optimize and realize that a 0.125 shift in rate is only going to cost you $2,000 over 5 years, or $5,000 over 5 years, or some relatively small amount of money against the $500,000 you're borrowing. And optimize it within a range of acceptability and move on, because odds are you have a better use of your time than getting it perfect. So our goal is to teach people how to optimize.
Yep. Part of that, if you're optimizing, there's going to be change involved. There's a good chance there'll be change involved. So with change comes risk, and we all like our comfort zones, and our industry is probably, from my personal experience, and I think most people's would echo this, we are risk adverse. And there are reasons for that. Don't get me wrong. It's not necessarily a bad thing. But what we also want to really focus in what we're teaching is not just to optimize, but also how to do that while mitigating our risk or reducing our risk. So part of what we're going to teach as we go through the various classes and courses is a framework around decision making. So we can not only let you help you make a decision, sell a decision, but also have mitigations and sensible mitigations in place to try and stop any adverse effects from what we're doing. Yeah. Communication is another cornerstone of what we're talking about. We've already talked about the different cases when you're looking at scenarios with different people from different backgrounds, not being able to communicate clearly in the same language, being in different silos. We want to encourage, we want to start breaking down these silos. And as you'll see from today's homework, we believe that networking, we believe sharing, interaction, discussion, debate are all cornerstones of doing this. So there is going to be a lot of that in the program. But ultimately, it is a finance program. So we're aiming to teach, especially engineers and geologists, how to speak in the finance language, how to win over the people from a financial background on all 3 of those different perspectives.
And I'll finish this off, but on communication, we're not going to teach you how to use every financial tool in the world. We're going to teach you how to communicate with financial math. So it's just as good to say the payback is a half a year as to say the IRR is 700%. Either one gets the same message across, which is the money is going to come back really quickly because of this, this, and this, and this. So your risk is X. It's very important to communicate in a language that people can understand. Now, one of the things that I had a wonderful communications coach years ago, and he said, you have to do something very important if you're going to change something. You have to communicate something 3 different ways. And the content creator for this class The lady who helps us, who's Russian, who's very much got a domineering spirit to her, she said the exact same thing. She said, everyone learns 3 different ways. So unless you talk about it and present it and then give homework and give people 3 different ways to do it, they might not learn. So the key to communication is to break down the silos and to use both a quantifiable thesis. And we're going to focus, by the way, on NPV versus IRR. We'll talk about that later. NPVs are far easier to quantify than IRRs in simpler ways. IRR is an incredibly toxic tool for the mining business. It breaks down very quickly for most decisions. We're going to talk about how to create a thesis. And then we're going to talk about the emotional drivers. How do you manage the risk and the downside? Now, finally, what is my goal? My goal when I started looking at mineral processing was to reduce water usage in the Atacama Desert by 50% in the mining space over a 10-year period. I'm not going to make that goal because I'm running out of time from a 10-year clock perspective, but my belief that that goal is viable has gotten much stronger. Now, think about that. The fact that I believe we've got current technology to reduce water consumption by 50% in the driest place on Earth without fundamentally shifting the cost structure of our industry. And I've got high belief about that. And I'm a quantifiable person, so it's not like I'm spouting unicorns and fairy tales. These are simple, random decisions that can be done. The fact that we can make things more sustainable while making more money, if we never make $1 off this executive education program, but we get some of the change to happen in the industry, we'll have succeeded. We'll have done more good in our spare time than we ever could have done running a Boy Scout troop or doing Taekwondo. This is an excellent use of education. This is where we believe we can go. And we believe that sustainability is practice makes perfect. Okay, now, coming back from that perspective, and ignore my child in the hallway who's making noise, if you guys can hear that. I might have to text him to be quiet. The joys of communicating inside your own house is if a kid's got headphones on, you actually just text them. To talk about different means of communications for different people. So some people, like I've got multiple children in my house. The only way I can communicate with them is via text, and we live together. Like, it's COVID. Like, you should be able to like just shout, "Hey, be quiet," but that won't work. But if you text them, they'll answer up, which is quite a fascinating thing. So talking about communication, so for this particular kid, I can text, "Shut up." Boom, problem solved. But I can't communicate that way necessarily in person because he won't hear it. Does that make sense? He won't see it. He's tied to his method, and that's where that comes down. Now, finally, on risk, yes, love language. I'm a lovely parent. The fact is I've got 5 children. It is COVID. This is month 8 of being stuck at home with them. The fact that they're all alive makes me a really good parent. Some people actually have reduced their number of children or figured out that maybe they could move out. And this particular one is 19, so he could move out. I believe the military is hiring still. Sorry, I'll stop cracking jokes about parenting. Risk reduction. I am someone who is incredibly weird risk tolerance. I'm far riskier than Ben Murphy is. I spend my life making risks that are far greater, and I have actually historically made far less money than him. The most interesting thing about that relative concept is I'm probably far wealthier. So if you know when to gamble, if you actually put your money down when it's rational, make money, you can make money relatively easily. This is the same part of this business, but the key is to get rid of the dumb ideas. The key is when it's not the right decision, just punt. Now, most people get so scared that they are so terrified of making any decision that they punt on everything. And we're also not saying that. We're not saying just freeze. We're saying actually think through. Is this worth exploring longer? Is this worth making sense of? And is this worth moving forward, or is this worth killing? Okay, now when we get into other fields, people are going to get very frustrated with us. Ben, you're about to say something.
No, I was about to express my relief. I thought you were about to sing The Gambler for us.
No, I'm not going to sing The Gambler because I can't sing.
But it is relevant.
That.
Yes.
It is relevant. And you're in Colorado, so it's incredibly relevant because it was shot on a train in Colorado. I believe it was Colorado or Wyoming. But yes, you have to give yourself the time to make the right decisions. And that's what we're going to teach. And again, we have a lot of content. We have a lot of stuff to teach. And this first class, we're not going to get you to necessarily learn all of it. We're going to start with the framework of where we're going. Let's talk about what's upcoming before we talk about the short term. Let's just talk about the rest of the program quickly. And we don't actually have a slide on that, but we'll talk about it before we talk about the homework. We're going to have 4 more classes to the first course. We're going to have Exploration Economics, which is all about exploration and building projects. It should be exploration and developmental economics, but it'll be really about what we're really going to start with is exploration. And in that,
start at the beginning, yeah.
Yep, we're going to start with a clear checklist. We're going to give you a checklist on how to review any project. Now, the key point of that checklist is you can use that checklist even for a public operating company. It's a checklist on how to look at something and make sure you're not missing anything. And we're going to discuss why exploration has destroyed a lot of wealth and why people are not getting jobs in exploration. Okay, and this is going to be, our panelist, Janice, who's here today, is going to talk to you about how painful this conversation was the first time we had it, because my perspective is different. My perspective is an economic perspective, not a science perspective, not an emotional perspective, not a stock market punter perspective. It is an economic perspective, which is how do we make bets around exploration and development that make sense. The next class will be real options. Now, it's really funny that we're starting a corporate finance / economics class with real options, but we believe it's far more important to understand how to frame a bet than how to number a bet. If you can't make the qualitative argument, I don't care what the equation is. You don't even know what the math you're doing is. And I'm going to argue the bulk of the people in our industry are so focused on being quantitative first that they don't sit down and say, what exactly am I trying to say first? They don't write the word problem out. So we're going to talk about how to write a word problem. And we're going to steal from someone who people absolutely have learned to despise because he was part of the Trump administration, though I liked him well before that point. We're going to steal from Ben Carson, who wrote a brilliant book for the Christian press on how he decided who he was going to kill when he was a doctor. And I love the parts, all but the Jesus parts. I thought it was the best book I ever read in a lot of ways. And I got to the end and realized that I wasn't religiously inclined with him because I'm Jewish, he's Christian. But his non-Jesus parts are absolutely brilliant. And he talks about how we made decisions that were life or death for people and did it with an understanding and not a nice, in some ways not a nice understanding, but in a lot of ways he made decisions that I would never want to make.
Yeah. But it's a really, the point is it's a really great framework, and it feeds really well into decision making and real options, and helping you to nut it out before you go through the other steps.
Then we're going to get into mineral processing economics.
Yay!
Now, which has been Murphy's stuff, and which is important. And a lot of what we're going to talk about is going to be processing, because processing is where the lowest hanging fruit in our industry is. Okay, so don't get super excited about other things, because the reality is 90% of the decisions in our industry today are not about finding new ore bodies. We haven't found them in 15 years. They're not about changing how we're going to do tailings, because we're only going to change how we do tailings as we change the mill. We're not going to get rid of the tailings dam unless we change the processing mill first. So 90% of the decisions that are left in the mining business are inside the mill. Okay, now that sounds really horrible to say that, but we've got to talk about how the mill impacts everything else. So we're going to have an entire one class on mineral processing, and we'll, by the way, have a longer course on mineral processing as well. As we go through this, we're going to be teaching this on and on and on and on, because we believe it's important. But we're going to start with a quick, what can you learn about mineral processing economics in 90 minutes or less, which, by the way, by the end of that class, if you aren't completely befuddled, we will not have done our job right. We're not going to be able to actually answer any questions. We're going to help you frame them. And we're going to cap it all out with a sustainability class. And we brought in a really a really active environmentalist professor / postdoc from UBC to go against us on sustainability, because she is very passionate about how we need to change everything now. And me and Ben are both very much we're very Buddhist in how we approach sustainability, which is we're trying to bring people along with us. And we're not trying to be activists, we're trying to teach economics that will force sustainability. We're all probably equally passionate about the change, but we're approaching it from a perspective that you have to lead people to water. And it's a very different perspective. But we're going to have her come in, and we're going to help you build a checklist around sustainability, which, by the way, isn't 100% done. It's the one homework assignment that I'm still frustrated with because I don't like the way I did the first version. but we'll get there. It's doable, but we're going to make it better. And we're going to give you a model. And the model will come in about mineral processing course, and that will be usable for mineral processing plus sustainability, and the model will be carried on into other classes. So we're going to start teaching you how to, hey, if we increase tonnage by 2,000 tons a day on a mill, what happens? If we increase recovery, if we decrease water usage, if we do this, if we do that, we're going to start letting you play with variables in a theoretical mind. And by the way, we're not giving you any live data on anyone's operation. We've got lots of that, but we actually made this mine up. My professors actually called me up and said, which mine did you steal? That's real. I'm like, no,
it's always the mythical 70,000 ton per day copper mine.
Excuse me, this was 100,000 ton per day copper mine, grading 0.6%. I'll have you know, I did not get the mythical 70,000. I made a mythical 100,000. And it's grading 0.6%, and there's no moly credit, I'll have you know.
There you go.
Because I'm sick and tired of trying to explain to people how moly credits have different recovery than copper credits.
Yep.
Like we're not going to teach you how to deal with a moly credit. Like that is such an incredibly difficult sub-problem. And if you're optimizing the moly credit, you're probably made the mistake of not optimizing the mine.
Yeah.
Okay. The number of people I've seen who spent their entire career optimizing a moly credit, at the end of it, you're like, how much is that credit worth? They're like, a lot of money. I'm like, how much per ton? They're like, a lot. I'm like, 25 cents.
Yep.
They're like, what do you mean 25 cents? I'm like, well, you're only getting a 57% payable. And you're only recovering 60% of it. And you're 0.014% moly. It's 20 cents a ton. How many we got on the moly circuit? Oh, by the way, your copper recovery is 78%. And industry average is 85 for your grind size. So maybe take all those people off that moly, but just turn the moly circuit off for the next 2 weeks. Just ignore it and focus on your core value. It's magnitude. It's understanding that 1% shift in core recovery is what you're trying to accomplish. And you could get the moly circuit to be perfection beyond perfection, but the moly circuit is only 3% of your total economics. You can't ever make it material. And we're going to start talking about these things. It doesn't mean that we're going to say that you don't try to get everything, but actually optimize your low-hanging fruit and figure that stuff out. And this is the thing that I think people are not that good at. And that's where sustainability comes in. We believe that we can change this industry. We believe that we've got the right tools to change this industry, which is education. We believe that we can change this industry with remarkably little, what's the emotional driver behind the moly fixation? We'll get there. But we believe that we can get that to work out in rational perspective. And I promised Ben Murphy I would not read questions live. I promised him I would not read them live.
Well,
I made him that promise, and Eric got it there. So my emotional driver behind the moly fixation is twofold. The first one is back in 2008, 2009, in hedge fund days, the moly price went through the roof and it bankrupted a lot of people. And that was, I remember that very vividly. It was sort of like the Palladium corner by Ford in 2000. These are these moments when people don't quite get how the cause effect of fracking destroyed the moly price, which destroyed the copper industry, which then resulted in incredible write-downs for people. So I have emotionally realized that moly is one of those distractions that gets people into trouble. Yep. $34, $8. It was the same, but bubble burst. Ben, by the way, if you get into lead, he was there when the mine got bankrupted around the lead price because he didn't have what was it? You didn't have a filter press that was working.
Filter press.
And the lead price dropped how much while you had the inventory in stock?
Yeah, it went from 4,000 a ton back to sub 1,000 a ton.
While it was sitting on your dock?
While it was sitting on a big pile on site.
Yeah.
20,000 tons of the stuff.
Yes. And that was to save how much money in capital?
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk about these real world examples.
Yeah. So we're both coming from pain. Like we both get that this is not academic. We're not teaching you academic finance. We're teaching you how to look at problems and how, by the way, when the price of a commodity is $4,000 a ton, the only thing you do is ship every ton you have. And you might not care about operating that mill the most efficiently. You might not care about the quality of your equipment. Keep in mind that how you act in the peak bubble cycle is very different than how you act in a trough. Okay, because you're not a price setter, you're a price taker. And you have to adjust your philosophy to the economic equation, even if it does not make sense at the time.
It's
Okay.
not one size fits all.
Yeah,
Cool.
and we're going to be real as we talk about this.
Yep.
So let's talk about social media. Ben, this was
Yeah,
your idea.
so once again, we're encouraging networking. We're encouraging getting to know everyone who's on this program because we believe that's some of the value. So homework for this week, and you can see it in the LMS as well. Basically, go into the LMS and in the comment section, write a brief intro for yourself. Just pretty similar to what we did tonight, but maybe a little bit more detail for some of us. Just introducing yourself to your fellow classmates, and also please put a link to your LinkedIn profile there. If you don't have a LinkedIn profile, we are very big fans of social media sharing. We recommend to you, you get one, and we recommend you share it with others. So the second part of your homework is to connect with at least 5 members of your class, your course mates, on LinkedIn. Just send them a connection request, say hi, and I'm sure they'll see where you're from as well. Just so we can all connect to each other and meet some new network, expand our network.
It is 2020. Okay, the number of people who are underemployed in our industry is shocking. Okay, everyone has to reach out to each other. Whether you're both not employed, that's fine. At least you can talk to each other because one of you might see a job that's right for the other person, or might have something to give someone else. I'm currently not working. I lost my job from the company that Ben currently works for in May. I made the decision that I wasn't going to go back. I was just going to write my PhD because I was in a funded PhD program. So I just gave up for the year because I've got 5 kids at home. So having a job plus 5 kids plus a PhD was one thing too many. So I went down and then I somehow picked up this executive education program, which was not part of the plan for the year. But hey, it's 2020. You got to try something new. Yeah. What things that we're going to be doing is we're going to be working on hashtags. Is the next slide a hashtag, or is it the last?
No,
slide?
I don't think we've got to start on the hashtag.
So let's talk about hashtags. We want discussion online, and it's very important for us to have discussion online. So if you got questions about this course, if you got questions about Molly pricing or anything you want, tag it hashtag BRIMM101 on LinkedIn and attach either me or Ben. The advantage of that from your perspective is I've got probably one of the largest networks in the industry. So if you attach my name to one of your posts, you're going to be seen by at least 300 or 400 or 500 or if not 1,000 other people because LinkedIn serves up my name to just about everyone in the industry. And I don't mind you spamming me with questions about the course. Okay. I will promise to answer anything that's tagged to me or hashtag BRIMM101 within 24 hours. So our goal is to get discussions. Our goal also is to get other students to answer other students' questions. Okay, what Eric can't tell you about exploration, or what Eric and Janice can't tell you about exploration, probably isn't worth knowing. We've got some experts in this class that are incredibly good at their topics. They've been around the block on their geology, on their this, on their mineral processing, on their finance. We had the head of ING in our last class. For metals and mining. There's an incredible amount of content out there, and you're going to get people who are going to give you back answers. And the best way to do it is to have public discussion. If you need to ask me a question or Ben a question, and you need just to email it to us, feel free. We're not opposed to private questions.
Yeah,
but we find that public questions and public discussions massively increases everyone's value because our goal is to educate. And our goal is not necessarily to educate only behind the firewall. We're not giving a secret sauce. Oh, come join our sub $1,000 course. That's, by the way, Canadian sub $1,000 course.
Sorry, Canadians.
Yeah.
I'm Australian. I feel your pain normally.
The going rate for mineral economics courses is $2,000 a credit. So we're slightly different in the price point. From a credit versus cost. We're not trying to do this in a silo. Our goal is to change the industry. And the only way we can change the industry is by getting a bunch of people out there to think differently. And the only way to get people to think differently is to get discussion going. And the only venue where discussion matters anymore within the business world is LinkedIn. So that's where we're headed. Okay. Everyone is on LinkedIn, from the CEO of BHP to the head of FLS to every other person. They're all on LinkedIn and they're all lurking. Okay. So if you're trying to get yourself out there, we're going to work with you. And by the way, it's uncomfortable. Asking stupid questions is uncomfortable. The number of times I've asked questions about metallurgy. I had a CEO who quit on me once because I went out and I was looking at a certain type of aeromag survey on a project I was running. And the CEO said, well, it's going to take me a month to answer that question. I said, fuck it. I'm going to go ask online. And he was so angry. He's like, I was going to spend a month thinking about that. I'm like, well, dude, I asked online. I had 35 people who told me I was an idiot for even thinking about it. It's dead. Great. But I was going to spend a month thinking about that. I'm like, that's fine. You could have spent 3 months thinking about that. That's not relevant. Relevant is we killed it in 12 hours. Let's move on. He's like, but you look stupid. I'm like, no.
So
I had 35.
It's a great resource.
I had 35 very intelligent people tell me I was stupid. I didn't look stupid. They gave me a bunch of information that I was stupid. Okay. You know, and that's what social media is about. You can, just because you're wrong doesn't mean you don't learn from it. Okay. And I don't think anyone looks down on me because I say something stupid on social media. People look down on me because I ask questions. And by the way, the people who, yes, fail fast and learn faster. The people who do look down on me for the bros in the industry who look down on me for willing to admit what I don't know. Great. Let them sit in their shells, you know, being hermit crabs. We're all good. Okay. We're going to do this together. Now, one last point. If we're trying to make this thing work for people, if you have feedback, if you don't like our format, if I talk too quickly, you have to tell me. Okay, I have a history of thinking at about 3,000 words a minute. I do audiobooks at 3x speed into my brain. The speed at which my brain works is insane. So if you need me to slow down, raise your hand, comment, tell me. I will not be offended. Ben, you got 4 minutes. Anything else you want to add?
Absolutely. We love the feedback. We want to engage in conversation on social media and in class. So I guess before we wrap up, we've got a few more minutes. Has anyone got any questions or any points they want to clarify or discuss or make? No.
Wow.
Good. Well, we've done all right, or stunned people into silence.
Yeah, I think that's, and in the future, we like questions. So think about at least 2 questions in every class and give them to us. You will not offend us. And they can be stupid questions. They can be, hey, why are you both wearing collared shirts? Because we decided we're getting paid, no more t-shirts. My theme in my entire last program was colorful, cool t-shirts. I had a different one for every class, including everything you can imagine. And we determined that if we're actually going to sell an executive education program, we have to look like we actually care. So I'm not even doing this in my living room anymore. Last time around, this was my living room with my kids running around. I actually created an office to do this from, so we can show that we care. Anything else, or are we done?
Cool.
Wow, that was the least number of questions ever. That either means we're really registered, or by next week we'll be down to 1 person.
Yeah, no worries.
Oh, yes. Janice will be joining us next week. She's the top left-hand corner. She's going to be our on Thursday, she's joining us. She's our exploration person.
Later this week, yep.
Yep. And by the way, we're looking for diversity. So if people have got diverse panelists for us, we're always looking. We're two bald white guys.
So having hair, you stand out straight away.
If you have hair, you're diverse. If you're not North American based, you're diverse. If you're not something that we are, you're diverse. We're not going to have, you're never going to see a panelist of 3 bald white guys. That just doesn't work. And we're always going to look for people who disagree with us. So Janice comes at exploration from a completely different perspective than either me or Ben. We would have invited Eric to come join us, but he's another white guy. So he unfortunately did not meet the diversity quota. So if you are diverse and you want to come join us on a panel and get a free course, we're all for it. Okay, we're looking for people to join us to help to counter us. Okay, we don't have all the answers. We don't see this as we're the only right voice in the business. We are 2 guys who believe we can change things, but we don't see the perspective. The best conversation I ever had with Ben was when we had an HR person who actually explained to us Pakistani history from her perspective. And I'm not going to go into it, but it was one of those conversations where 2 weeks later, me and Ben called each other up and said, you know, it's funny. We both thought we understood colonial history. Were we wrong? And I'm not saying I'm not. I don't know if we're right or wrong. I don't know if she was right or wrong. But the completely different perspective of how she saw it versus how we saw it, the exact same topic, was just eye-opening. So we need people who come in from different perspective and challenge us. Okay, this is the last class that will be just the two of us. You had got the two of us for the first one, but from now on, you're going to see other people with other perspectives, with other debates. And this will be a much broader discussion. Okay, thank you all. Cool. And I think we're just perfectly on time.
Great, guys.
See you on Thursday.
Thursday.
At 4 o'clock.
Cheers. Bye.